What I discovered about the signs of anxiety in people over 60 completely changed my perspective on how our bodies communicate something very important to us. Over the years of observing patients in this age group, I realized that there's a silent language the body develops, especially when anxiety begins to manifest itself in ways that often go unnoticed. Have you ever stopped to consider why some changes in your body after 60 might not just be natural signs of aging? Modern neuroscience reveals something fascinating about how anxiety expresses itself uniquely at this stage of life, creating patterns that are scientifically measurable and, most importantly, completely reversible when correctly identified. Mrs. Maria, 65, came to my office believing she was developing serious heart problems. She reported constant palpitations, especially in the mornings, a tight feeling in her chest that woke her up in the middle of the night, and unexplained fatigue that persisted even after a full night's sleep. All her cardiology tests came back normal, but something in her expression told me there was much more going on than what the numbers showed. It was during our third conversation that Maria mentioned, almost casually, how she felt constantly worried about situations that previously didn't bother her. Concerns about her adult children's health, anxiety about financial matters that were actually under control, and a persistent feeling that something bad was about to happen. She didn't connect these thoughts to the physical symptoms she experienced daily. What Maria didn't know was that her body was displaying 5 specific signs that science identifies as direct markers of how anxiety affects the body after age 60. These signs are so precise that recent studies have mapped exactly how each of them develops, and more importantly, how they can be completely reversed when addressed correctly. Today, I'm going to share with you these 5 scientifically validated signs I've observed in hundreds of patients like Maria. If you recognize at least 2 of them in your routine, I want you to type "yes" in the comments, because it means your body is trying to communicate something fundamental about your emotional well-being. These signs are not just isolated symptoms. They represent a sophisticated communication system that our body has developed to alert us to imbalances that can be corrected naturally, restoring the tranquility and vitality you deserve to have at this very special stage of life. Maria's transformation happened in a way that still moves me when I remember it. 3 months after our first appointment, she returned to the office with a completely different posture. Her shoulders, which had previously carried an invisible weight, now stood naturally erect, and her eyes shone with a serenity I hadn't seen since our first meeting. During this time, Maria had learned to recognize each of the 5 signals her body displayed as direct reflections of anxiety. Most surprising was discovering how symptoms she had attributed solely to aging were actually precise body responses to anxious thought patterns that intensified after her 65th birthday. She told me how discovering these signs changed her relationship with her body. Before, every heartbeat was a cause for panic, every muscle tension turned into worry about serious illness, and every change in sleep patterns generated a spiral of catastrophic thoughts that further fueled her physical symptoms. It was a cycle that perpetuated itself without her realizing the deep connection between mind and body. What struck me most about Maria's case was how she began to understand that her body wasn't failing or deteriorating, but rather reacting intelligently to specific emotional stimuli. When we scientifically explained why each signal appeared, when it intensified, and how her body was trying to protect her through these manifestations, everything began to make sense in a completely new way. Maria discovered that anxiety after 60 has unique characteristics because our nervous system undergoes natural adaptations that make some responses more intense and lasting. What was a fleeting worry in our 40s can turn into persistent physical symptoms in our 60s, not because we're weaker, but because our bodies have developed a greater sensitivity to protect us. During our conversations, she frequently mentioned how relieved she felt to realize she wasn't going crazy or developing serious illnesses. The signs that frightened her were actually accurate indicators that her body was functioning exactly as it should when faced with the anxiety-provoking stimuli specific to this stage of life. The most defining moment was when Maria realized she could anticipate the signs before they even fully manifested. She developed such refined body awareness that she could identify the earliest signs of each of the 5 signs and apply specific strategies to break the cycle before it intensified. 3 months later, Maria had not only eliminated the symptoms that brought her to the clinic, but had also developed renewed confidence in her ability to take care of her own emotional well-being. She understood that recognizing these signs wasn't about becoming a hypochondriac, but about developing an intelligent partnership with her own body. Today, Maria lives each day with a serenity she thought she had lost forever. She understood that the 5 scientifically validated signs were not enemies to be fought, but powerful allies that helped her reconnect with a wiser, more balanced version of herself. A version she discovered was always present, just waiting to be rediscovered. The first sign that science unequivocally identifies is a change in sleep patterns, specifically what we call anxious morning awakening. Recent neurological studies demonstrate that after the age of 60, the brain develops an increased sensitivity to stress hormones during the early morning hours, creating a very specific pattern that Maria experienced daily. She described waking up between 4 and 5 in the morning with an inexplicable sense of urgency, as if there was something important she should be doing, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what. Her heart was racing, a slight tightness in her chest, and thoughts that would begin to swirl around worries that during the day seemed manageable, but in the wee hours of the morning would take on frightening proportions. Neuroscience explains this phenomenon through the shift in circadian rhythms that naturally occurs after the age of 60. Cortisol, our stress hormone, naturally peaks early in the morning to prepare us for the day, but when there is underlying anxiety, this peak becomes disproportionately high, creating anxious awakenings that interrupt restful sleep. The second symptom manifests itself through specific muscle tension, concentrated primarily in the neck, shoulders, and jaw. Maria reported constant stiffness in these areas that didn't respond to conventional massages or muscle relaxants. She would wake up feeling as if she'd slept in an uncomfortable position, even when that wasn't true. Neuroplasticity research shows that anxiety after 60 creates different muscle tension patterns than those observed in younger people. The mature nervous system develops a tendency to keep specific muscle groups in a state of defensive contraction, especially those related to the protective posture we unconsciously assume when we feel vulnerable or threatened. This tension isn't just physical. It represents a bodily memory of accumulated worries. Every time Maria worried about something, her body registered that worry through micromuscular contractions that, over time, developed into permanent patterns of rigidity. It was as if her muscles were constantly preparing to face a threat that existed only in her thoughts. The third sign reveals itself through subtle but persistent digestive changes. Maria mentioned a feeling of abdominal discomfort that appeared especially at transitional moments of the day, such as before meals or in the late afternoon. It wasn't exactly pain, but an internal uneasiness that made her feel as if something wasn't working properly in her digestive system. The gut-brain connection becomes particularly sensitive after age 60, creating what scientists call an amplified enteric emotional axis. When we experience anxiety at this stage of life, the digestive system responds more intensely and lastingly, producing symptoms that can range from changes in appetite to feelings of heaviness or lightness in the stomach that don't correspond to what we actually ate. Maria discovered that these digestive sensations acted as an extremely accurate emotional barometer. When she began to worry excessively about a situation, her stomach would react before she was even fully aware that she was anxious. It was as if her digestive system had developed a capacity for emotional anticipation that her conscious mind hadn't yet realized. What's most striking about these first three signs is how they interconnect, forming a sophisticated body communication system. An anxious morning awakening influences muscle tension throughout the day, which in turn affects the digestive system, creating a feedback loop that can perpetuate itself indefinitely if not recognized and addressed appropriately. The most important discovery Maria made was understanding that these signs did not indicate that something was wrong with her body, but rather that her organism was functioning with impressive precision, communicating clearly and consistently when her emotional balance needed attention and care. The fourth scientifically validated sign manifests itself through a specific fatigue that doesn't improve with rest. Maria described to me a peculiar exhaustion that remained even after a full night's sleep, as if her internal batteries never fully recharged. This fatigue had a different quality than ordinary physical fatigue. It was as if her vital energy was being constantly drained by an invisible source. Recent neuroenergetic studies demonstrate that anxiety after the age of 60 consumes neural resources much more intensely than in other age groups. The mature brain expends a disproportionate amount of energy trying to process and control anxious thoughts, creating a state of cognitive exhaustion that manifests as generalized physical fatigue. Maria noticed that this fatigue intensified particularly after social situations or when she had to make decisions, even the simplest ones. It was as if her nervous system was working in constant emergency mode, consuming extra energy to process information that was previously handled automatically. Choosing what to wear or deciding what to make for lunch became mentally exhausting tasks. Neuroscience explains this phenomenon through what we call anxious executive overload. After the age of 60, areas of the brain responsible for executive functions like planning and decision-making become hyperactive when there is underlying anxiety, expending excessive energy on processes that should be efficient and automatic. The fifth and final sign manifests itself through changes in body temperature regulation and sensations of tingling or numbness in the extremities. Maria reported hot flashes that appeared unrelated to hormonal issues, followed by episodes of unexplained coldness, especially in her hands and feet. She also mentioned a subtle tingling sensation in her fingers that appeared mainly during moments of worry. Vascular neurology research shows that anxiety after 60 significantly affects the peripheral circulatory system. Chronic stress alters vasoconstriction and vasodilation patterns, creating irregularities in blood flow that manifest as temperature fluctuations and tingling sensations characteristic of this age group. Maria discovered that these sensations served as early warning signs of anxiety episodes. When she began to feel her hands getting cold or a slight tingling sensation, she knew her nervous system was going into alert mode, even if she hadn't yet consciously identified the reason for her worry. The most fascinating aspect of these 5 signs is how they represent an intelligent evolution of the organism after the age of 60. The body develops a refined sensitivity to detect emotional threats, creating an early warning system that, when properly understood, becomes a powerful tool for self-knowledge and self-regulation. During our meetings, Maria began to notice that each sign had its own rhythm and intensity. Anxious morning awakening was more intense in the early days of the week. Muscle tension increased during periods of change. Digestive changes appeared when she was avoiding a situation. Fatigue intensified after emotional conflicts, and circulatory sensations emerged as the first signs of emotional overload. The most transformative discovery was understanding that these signals were not defects or flaws of aging, but rather a sophisticated way the mature organism has developed to communicate specific emotional needs. Each signal carried precise information about what kind of care and attention your emotional well-being required at that particular moment. Maria learned to read these signals as a detailed map of her internal emotional state, developing a collaborative partnership with her own body that completely transformed her experience of living in her 60s. What strikes me most when observing cases like Maria's is discovering how these 5 scientifically validated signals function as a specific body language that develops after the age of 60. Each signal doesn't appear in isolation. They form communication patterns that, once decoded, offer precise information about our internal emotional state and the most effective strategies for restoring balance. Over the months of following Maria's development, I documented how she developed an impressive ability to anticipate these cues. She noticed that her anxious morning awakening often preceded days when she faced situations she considered challenging. Muscle tension intensified when she was avoiding important conversations or postponing significant decisions. Digestive changes arose when her thoughts became preoccupied with worries about the future. The specific fatigue consistently appeared after periods when she forced a semblance of normalcy in social situations, expending extra emotional energy to mask her true feelings. And the sensations of altered circulation acted as early warning signs, appearing minutes or even hours before she consciously realized she was entering an anxious state. Maria developed personalized strategies for each signal based on what neuroscience teaches us about brain plasticity after 60. For anxious morning awakenings, she created a gentle transition ritual that included specific breathing and body movements that signaled safety to her nervous system. For muscular tension, she discovered release points that acted as keys to undoing patterns of accumulated rigidity. Digestive changes responded best when she practiced a specific form of mindfulness during meals, creating direct communication between her emotions and her digestive system. Specific fatigue significantly decreased when she honored her needs for emotional, not just physical, rest. And circulatory sensations normalized when she applied targeted heating techniques that restored peripheral blood flow. 6 months after our first consultation, Maria had transformed her relationship with anxiety in ways she never imagined possible. She hadn't completely eliminated moments of worry, that would be unrealistic, but she had developed an ability to recognize, understand, and respond to her body's signals so effectively that anxiety episodes became brief and manageable. What Maria discovered, and what I see repeatedly in other patients in this age group, is that the body after 60 isn't deteriorating, it's refining. The 5 scientifically validated signs represent an evolution of body awareness that, when embraced properly, offers a level of self-awareness and emotional control that can be more sophisticated than anything experienced in previous decades. Maria's transformation taught me that treating anxiety after 60 isn't about returning to who we were before, but about discovering a wiser, more balanced version of ourselves, a version that understands the nuances of how body and mind communicate at this unique stage of life, and that uses this understanding to create a deeper, more lasting experience of well-being. Today, Maria lives each day with a serenity she describes as unlike anything she's experienced before. It's not just the absence of anxiety, it's the presence of a bodily wisdom that guides her through emotional challenges with grace and confidence. If you've recognized some of these signs in your own experience and want to learn more about how to transform anxiety into emotional wisdom after 60, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. I publish new content every week, specifically designed to help people in this age group discover the extraordinary potential that exists in living fully and peacefully during this special stage of life. Neuroscience reveals something fascinating about why these 5 signs manifest so specifically after the age of 60. Recent studies show that the mature brain develops a specialized neural network that connects emotional memory, body perception, and threat anticipation in a way unique to this age group. This network functions as an evolutionary protective system that becomes more sensitive and sophisticated with experience accumulated throughout life. What we perceive as anxiety is actually our brain using decades of emotional learning to alert us to situations it considers potentially destabilizing. The most striking discovery is that this heightened sensitivity doesn't represent a weakness, but rather a form of emotional intelligence that can be directed constructively. When we understand that our body is offering us valuable information through these signals, we can transform what previously seemed like problematic symptoms into highly effective self-care tools. The brain after 60 has a unique ability to integrate past experience with present perception, creating an emotional navigation system that, when properly understood, offers an unparalleled level of inner wisdom. If these scientific findings resonated with you, please share this video with someone who could also benefit from this information. Many people over 60 live with these signs without realizing that they represent an opportunity for profound and transformative personal development. What I've observed over the years is that people like Maria often come to the doctor believing they're losing control over their own bodies, when in fact they're gaining access to a more refined internal communication system than they've ever had. This misperception happens because our culture tends to interpret changes after 60 as decline, when they often represent evolution. During a particularly moving consultation, Maria told me something that changed my perspective on this entire process. She commented that for the first time in decades, she felt truly connected to her own body, not despite the signs of anxiety, but through them. She had developed an intimacy with her inner workings that allowed her to navigate emotional challenges with a precision and efficiency that surprised even herself. This observation led me to research more deeply how anxiety manifests itself uniquely in this age group. I discovered a fundamental difference between pathological anxiety and what we might call evolutionary emotional sensitivity. Problematic anxiety paralyzes us and diminishes our ability to function. Evolutionary emotional sensitivity provides us with valuable information that, when interpreted correctly, expands our ability to respond to complex situations. The 5 scientifically validated signs we've discussed serve as indicators of this evolving sensitivity. When they appear in isolation and intensely, they may indicate anxiety that requires professional attention. When they manifest as part of a communicative pattern that we can learn to interpret, they represent an extraordinarily valuable tool for self-awareness. Maria learned to distinguish between these 2 types of manifestations. She realized that when these signs appeared accompanied by catastrophic thoughts and avoidant behaviors, she needed to apply more direct intervention strategies. When they appeared as subtle alerts that guided her about her current emotional state, she received them as useful information to adjust her self-care. Maria's journey taught me that recognizing the 5 scientifically validated signs of anxiety after 60 isn't about diagnosing problems, but about discovering a sophisticated body language that develops with maturity. Each sign carries decades of accumulated wisdom, offering precise guidance on how to navigate this phase of life with greater serenity and self-confidence. Anxious morning awakenings become anticipatory awareness. Muscle tension becomes signals that we need specific physical care. Digestive changes become accurate emotional barometers. Particular fatigue becomes reminders to honor our energetic needs. And circulatory sensations become early warnings that allow us to respond proactively to changes in our emotional state. When we understand that our bodies after 60 aren't failing, but rather evolving into more refined forms of internal communication, each day becomes an opportunity to develop a deeper partnership with ourselves. Anxiety stops being something we face and becomes something we understand, work with, and transform into practical wisdom. If this content brought clarity to your own experience, subscribe to the channel to receive more specific information on emotional well-being after 60. Turn on the bell to be notified whenever I publish new content. And if this video can help someone you know, please share it with kindness. In the comments, tell me which of the 5 signs resonates most with your experience. Your insights not only help me create more targeted content, but also create a supportive community where we all learn from each other. Remember that living emotionally fulfillingly after 60 is not only possible, it's your natural right. Your body is by your side, offering constant guidance so you can enjoy this phase of life with the serenity and wisdom you deserve. Until the next video, take care of yourself with the affection you would give your best friend.